Welcome to the Doctor's Life podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Diane. Think of the podcast as a mobile doctor's lounge where we take some time out and explore topics that doctors are interested in related to what it means to be a doctor in today's world and creating a rich, satisfying, and meaningful life, as well as making the healthcare system better for doctors and patients. So, if you are a doctor, you'll feel right at home, and if you aren't a doctor, you'll get a better understanding of doctors and what we think about and talk about. I know you will enjoy the conversation. Let's jump in. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Doctor's Life podcast. I'm Dr. Diane Ansari-Wynn, your host. And today we are going to be talking about a topic that we haven't talked about before, and I haven't really heard it much on any other podcast. So we're going to delve into being an empty nester. So in addition to being a physician and parents, some of us are getting to that age where our kids are leaving home. And so today, I am so excited to have my good friend, Dr. Toyin Falusi, on again. We first met right around the podcast, actually, and we did our first podcast episode together in November 2017, right, Dr. Toyin?
Right.
I can't believe it that we've been doing the podcast for a long time now, over 2 years. She wrote a wonderful book called The Decade After, and it's a guide to working through divorce, which is another topic that we don't talk about very often. Definitely check out her book. You can find out more about it on www.thedecadeafter.com, and you can find it on Amazon and go and grab a copy for you or somebody that you know that's going through that. Dr. Falusi is, oh man, she's just a great person. She's a mentor. She's an infectious disease specialist who has done amazing work here in the Chicago metro area, has written papers, national speaker, and just an all-around amazing person. And also is an empty nester like me. So welcome, Dr. Toyin. So nice to have you back again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diane. A pleasure being back on this show. And I can't believe it's been over 2 years, but really excited to be talking about this really cool topic with you, Dr. Diane.
Yeah, it is a really cool topic. You know, I think both of us are kind of getting accustomed to being empty nesters. So let's start at the beginning. I'll just share quickly my story. I am a recent empty nester. I have 2 kids. My son is a junior in college and my daughter is a freshman. So I just became an empty nester in August of 2019. We're recording this in early 2020. And how long have you been an empty nester, Dr. Toyin?
I have 2 daughters, and I became an empty nester August of 2018. So I have a senior in college and a sophomore in college. So August of 2018 was when I became an official empty nester.
Right. So we're going to talk about how to be an empty nester, how to, I don't want to say overcome, but kind of how to work with being an empty nester. Because for those of you who were like, yay, I can't wait for my kids to leave the house, this is not for you. You can just go along your merry way and listen to another podcast. But for those of us for which it was an adjustment, please stay tuned because we've got a lot of information that is going to help. At the very least, you'll find that you have some kindred spirits on the podcast today. So let's start with you, Dr. Toyin. You're over a year out, like a year and a half. Let's just talk at the beginning, like how did you feel when the last one, or even the first one? Because I tell you what, even the first one leaving to me was an adjustment. So you can start wherever you want with that.
Okay. So I'll start way back in August of 2016, which is when my older daughter was leaving for college in Michigan. And our trio was going to become a duo. And that was a huge adjustment, just to have kind of a tripod get kind of almost destabilized and just not being part of that day-to-day of making sure they're fed and warm and in bed at the right time and up for class and all that stuff. And that was a huge adjustment. And I remember feeling, a whole bunch of emotions, including, sadness, anxiety, and knowing that when this happens, the next 2 years are going to happen really quickly. And then I would be really, a single empty nester when my second one left. So a lot of emotions. And I do remember journaling a lot then and just I talked about it a lot with her and how I was feeling. And she said, but, I'm always going to FaceTime you and talk to you on the phone, and it's okay. And you still have Fumi. That's my younger daughter. It's going to be okay. And I remember all the anxiety dropping her off and hoping she does well in college. And then in the 2 years between 16 and 18, the duo, we had a lot of very different adventures. It's what happens when it's just now you with one child. If I had to travel for conference, she would, take a day off school, or we would stay a little later. And we did a lot more traveling together. We reconnected on a different level when it was just the two of us. We looked forward to visiting or having my other daughter visit. But by June of her, as she was starting her senior year, I knew what was coming. And so it was hard just even thinking about just being without either of them at home. And I know that they get really busy at college, they get consumed, they make new friends. So they don't come home as much as you hope. And I started to really process that. And I remember in August, I wrote, it was almost like a cry for help on Facebook. I kind of wrote a little post called, accepting things we cannot change, because I figured, what, this is something that I wanted. We wanted her to graduate high school and go to college. So it was a good thing. And she was going to go to college. So that was a good thing. But then it didn't make it easier. And so I kind of wrote, well, these are, 12 things that that are positive about being an empty nester. And I remember people then started, commenting and saying, oh yeah, I felt this same way too. Or, oh, I should write a list of things. That would make me feel like, I have power over this process. And I found out that by writing it, first of all, there are a lot of people who just want to talk about what they're feeling. And then also it made me feel like, kindred spirits. I'm not the only one who's like an emotional wreck about not having my kids at home. So that made it feel not so crazy. And then I wrote another 2 things because I realized that writing made me feel better. It was a way to put my thoughts on paper, but it also allowed me to process things, in a certain way. So it wasn't easy. And as much as I loved that they were flying, it was hard. And I know you can relate to that.
I can. What I have learned from other folks outside of me is that for many people, I think for most people, that empty nest is a grief process. And I definitely did not really realize that until my second left. But when my first left, I remember that I was like starting to go into private places and shed tears and then wipe them away and come back and be oh yeah, it's going to be great, talking to my son. And then I remember that his dad and I were supposed to go together to take him to school. I was such a mess that the morning that they were supposed to leave, I decided not to go. Yes, that Dr. Toyin's like, you did? Because we're on Zoom so we can see each other. So yes, I was like, I'm not going to go because I'm just going to be a mess. my son is not going to benefit from me going down there, because he's going to think that he's going to have to take care of me, or it might bring up some emotions for him leaving. And so I just wanted him to go with his dad so they could be like stiff upper lip and all of that stuff, because everybody is different. Every relationship with your kids are different, but that's what I felt that my son needed. However, I had still taken a couple days off of work to move him down there. And so I took those couple days anyway, so I could just sit on the couch and, do what I needed to do. If I needed to cry, or if I needed to just sleep or watch Netflix or whatever it was, just do what I needed to do, because I needed to be there present for my daughter, who was going through her own stuff. When the older one leaves, it really affects the younger too. Did you find that, Dr. Toyin?
Yes, I did, Dr. Diane. I mean, just in the last 2 minutes, Dr. Diane, you bring up so many different points, including being able to separate you from your son, and kind of like for his benefit, saying, you know what, as much as I want to be with you till that last minute, I'm going to put you first. Because this is about him, his new adventure. He's already processing the separation, and they're having that burden of like, oh my gosh, my mom's in the pool on the floor. That's that kind of like, okay, I will step back just for now. I mean, that's that incredible, like, for the sake or the good of the kid, this is what I need to do. And, letting that excitement of, making his bed and figuring out who his roommate is, right there and then. And doesn't mean you weren't home like crying and sniffing. I would go into my daughter's room and sleep in her bed and sniff. I didn't change her sheets for like 3 months. There are things that you do, and and my sister, who's going to be an empty nester in a year, has already said, she's told her husband in writing that when we drop off our kid, she already has planned to check herself into like a yoga retreat, and all women's place. She's like, I'm not going back home to his room as an empty nester. I'm going to need some time between when we drop my kid off to just reconnect and renew my mind. So, I mean, we have to know, how we are going to be and what we need to do during this time. But it's also the dynamics change. You're right. When the older one leaves, especially if it's just the two of them, because there is something about, no matter what kind of relationship they have and what sex is and gender, and, there's all the high school stuff that's going on, there is still something about them and then the parents. And when the older person leaves, it's really hard for them also, because now you're like zoning in on them. They don't have anybody to deflect their attention to.
Yeah.
It's all them. You have all this extra time and energy just for them. They're missing their sibling. They're excited about what they're doing in college, and they can't wait, or at least they say they can't wait to try that out too. And then you're like 100% hovering over them. I was, because now it's like, wow, you're just the only one. So it's hard for them already. I want to be present for them and not just pining away for the one who's not there. And yeah, the dynamics do change.
Yeah. And you're right. The younger one, they're in a different role. You're in a different relationship with them. And then, I've talked to more than one parent who said that, they at first they didn't realize, but then they did realize that the younger one, they definitely feel that loss too. So when you lose something, there's usually some grief around it. And so there's all these stages of grief that you go through. So just, with the first one, like you say, you have the next one still home if you have more than one. So it kind of like buffers the blow of the first one. And so you can develop a different relationship with, but what I found at first is, first they call often, and then they start calling less often and less often. And then at first they come home more often. My son lives close enough where he can come home, relatively often. and then less often, and then less often. So your parenting style changes with them because, as you were saying, Dr. Toyin, like you can't make sure that they're warm and fed and safe and all of those things. So, for a parent that made sure that that happened, like even though they were getting to be more independent in high school, they stayed out later, they had friends that you might not know about, they were doing stuff that you might not know about. And they got themselves into college, and they're independent in a lot of ways. But I kind of felt like that my kid was going to be good to go if everything was smooth. But if things went sideways, they would definitely have to call and get help. Even to this day, I still leave my phone on at night because.
Same.
Yes.
And you get used to like just, anytime they are free and want to talk to you, you drop everything. I mean, the phone comes because a lot of it is the texting. They're sending you quick stuff. They're sending you quick little messages. And a lot of times we now have to like schedule a time and say, okay, we'll do a 3-way FaceTime now that they're both out of the house. But once in a while, they're walking from one class to the other and they decide, hey, let me call mom. And you're just like, first your heart skips because you're like, is everything okay?
Right.
Like the first thing is like, are you okay? And then it's like, yeah, I just wanted to say hi. You're just like, it was like the best thing ever.
Yes, it feels so good. Okay, so we talked about when our first one left. And I went through that too, where, it wasn't just 2 days, it was a couple months. And I think for my youngest too, where, I would just walk in his room just so I could walk in his room. Or, I remember just talking to somebody and they came over to the house and I was like, my son is gone. And they said, he's going to be back home. And I was like, oh yeah.
True.
It was just so much. Yeah, let's talk about when our last one left the house. For those of you out there who only have one child or have the last one leaving, what was that like for you, Dr. Toyin?
That was a lot more traumatic going into it. But I think maybe subconsciously, just because I knew how I felt when the first one left, that I was already kind of putting things in place to try to make it feel better. I had to tell myself, it was in the spirit of things I can't change. This is a good thing. There are people who, for some reason, their kids cannot leave the house, for a lot of various reasons. They want them to, they can't. And so I had to kind of come up with, well, this is what she wants to do. This is what we've worked towards. This is what she's put a lot of work into to be able to go out of the house. And I had to say, well, it's an empty nest because we call it that. But, unlike the birds where, once they fly, they go make their own place. And that's it. It's just to kind of nurture them and then they go make their own. I had to say, well, they do come back. And they come back, maybe sometimes not as often, but eventually when they're much older, past college, if we have a good relationship with them, they choose to come back, not out of obligation. They come back with friends, they come back with partners, eventually sometimes with spouses, that. So yeah, it's empty, but it's empty for a while. So I had to do all this mental games to find the positive in it, but it was hard. It really was hard the house feels 10 times larger. It's harder to make meals just for yourself.
Yes.
The conversation, there's no one to talk to. There were a couple of shows that my younger one and I, we like really trashy reality TV. It's my alternate world from my real life. And we would watch it together her senior year. And, there were things there was just routines it was hard. And then, half the time you're worried about their safety because they're out there. But it was difficult. I'm not going to lie about that. But I also tried to find the joy and really channel the things that I wanted to do. And I said, well, just think of it as just this space to try new things. And I know we'll talk about just some of the things that how we can kind of put ourselves into that positive frame, because
Right.
it can't change it.
Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna lay it all out for you all, but we wanted to try to first kind of give you all the, at least from our perspective, so that
Your turn.
Sorry?
Your turn.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yes. So that you all know when, whatever feelings you're having, they are okay. If you're excited about them leaving and you change their room into an office, then that's all good. If you're laying on their bed and crying like I did, then that's okay too. If you have some times where you feel good, bad, or in between, it's all good. It's often the time for myself, I went through, like I say, it's been a few months now, but not only did I go through like the loss of them leaving, but the sort of that, like, I felt like I was in limbo, or, asking myself, well, if I'm still a parent, like, what kind of parent will I be going forward? And what kind of mother will I be? And also, like, who the heck am I without this role of constantly having kids on your mind? Because, once they go, they don't need to be on your mind all the time. You're not thinking about when are they going to get home from school, or getting them to school, or going to their programs, their performances,
Mm-hmm.
or even, like you said, Dr. Toyin, spending time with them, that one-on-one time, building the relationship, all that stuff, cooking, laundry. Like, I had my kids do their own laundry, but, like, making sure it's done. And I know they could cook their own meals, and they did, but sometimes, but just making sure, like, I don't know, all those things, like, all those little micromanaging things that you used to do,
Correct.
you don't have to do anymore. And it's kind of weird at first, but then it does start to fill in. So we'll start to talk about how your life starts to change over time.
Yes.
And also proactive ways that you can work through the grief and the identity changes that can come along with being an empty nester. And we are talking from our perspective, well, because both of us are single. We don't have spouses, or partners that live with us. And so we're talking primarily from this perspective, but we will talk some about if you are in a relationship where you are living with someone, how that kind of changes too. That definitely changes as well. So there's a whole nother dimension there.
Yeah, I love the part about all the, even and you probably noticed that too, Dr. Diane, just from one child, from having both of yours home to when the first one leaves, all of a sudden there's a lot more time. And because they had different interests, and even if it's just one less, parent-teacher stuff, the older one was in band all throughout high school. So there were always concerts and recitals that my younger one was not in band or in the theater program. So all of that, all of these things just fell off my calendar. And it was like, and I told them, I said, I'm going to keep going to concerts at the high school. They played soccer a lot I was like driving around. I'm like, I'm going to go to AYSO games. And they're going to be like, who's your kid? I'm like, no, I'm just that soccer parent.
Right. It's like,
who's stuck in the past. But eventually it starts to fill in. And your question, because we're such high achievers, we're doctors, it's like, everything we do, we research it. We want to make sure we're doing our best for our families, for our children. And then when you go from hands-off day-to-day parenting, you kind of wonder, like, how do we do that? And how do we maintain that balance between letting them be independent versus worrying about them all the time. And because we're always thinking about the next steps. And okay, now we're not in the day-to-day cooking for them, but how do we, so those are the things that, because we're just always wanting to make sure everything's great.
Mm-hmm.
But the time, you do get a lot more time. And then your identity is so tied to, even when you work outside of the home and you're professional, you're still a hands-on parent. Those nights where you had to stay up because they were out in high school and they're past their curfew and you just want to make sure they're in bed before, you don't know what time to go to bed in college. And you're like, I can actually go to bed, but can I?
Early. You can go to bed early if you want to. But it's weird. Like it's weird going somewhere and not, I still have that feeling like, oh, I should get home or something. And then you realize you're like, I don't need to get home. There's nobody home.
That is one that takes getting used to.
Mm-hmm.
That, you're like, oh, okay. If there's a conference, if I choose to, I can stay an extra day if I don't have to work the next day. And that's okay.
That's okay.
Wow.
You could go on a trip. You can go on a trip, come back, and the kids don't even know that you have gone, because if you keep in touch just, through text or phone or whatever,
correct.
They don't know what you're up to. So everything changes so much where you're using, you and I think we're real similar, Dr. Toyin, where we kind of use our kids or had been using our kids as a frame of reference. And we really, part of our development into like a post and, not as a post, what I want to call it, like when they've left. So like right after they leave, yes, and you become the empty nester, like how to settle into that. So you guys, what we're going to talk about next is Dr. Toyin wrote a blog about empty nest syndrome, and she has so much wisdom. And Dr. Toyin, she's so smart. She has a system for this that really worked for her, and I read it over, and it's brilliant. And if you're looking also for a system to help yourself through other life changes, such as divorce, she wrote a beautiful book about that called The Decade After. Again, you can find that at www.thedecadeafter.com or on Amazon. But Dr. Toyin has a wonderful way of taking difficult life circumstances and breaking it down into easy, more manageable steps. So Dr. Toyin, can you please share your system? When I read it, I was thinking, man, this is awesome.
Oh, well,
it helped me a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Diane. I wrote, I did stuff with my list of my 12 things of just things that were going to be positive about that. But I did this one after I dropped my baby off. So I wrote it, I think, September of 2018, after we had dropped her off in California, where she spent her first year in college. It was about the COVID-7 and that college drop off that empties out your nest. And like you mentioned, I used the COVID-7 in my book on divorce and how we can apply those principles of success to divorce.
So for those of us who don't know what the COVID-7 are, do you mind telling us what the COVID-7 are before you jump in?
Sure. So the COVID-7 is from his very famous book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the 7 are: 1 is to be proactive. The second habit was to begin with the end in mind. 3rd, put first things first. 4th, think win-win. 5 is seek first to understand, then to be understood. 6 is synergize, and 7 is renewal. Mm-hmm. And so he wrote this in the context of successful people in business. applicable to relationships, business relationships, personal relationships. But I found out that those 7 habits you can really take and tailor to, I think, any situation. So I did that in my book around divorce and the 7 habits and applying them to being able to thrive after divorce. I did that. I have a podcast on 7 habits and menopause, believe it or not.
Oh,
all of those things, yes, on my blog. So I started
going through that too.
I started podcasting a few months ago and actually did a podcast on the 7 habits of menopause. It is a life situation.
Another difficult life situation.
Right? So I broke that down. I feel like you can just take it and put it into everything. But so I did that for this emptiness. And after I dropped her off and I said, okay, so the first one, being proactive, is knowing that the nest will empty out. And so you know exactly, especially if you plan it and the kid has applied to college and they get into college a couple of months ahead, they will be leaving. So starting to put systems in place, knowing that they will leave and whatever support that you're going to need, emotional support, talking about it, writing it down. So being proactive about that, it's going to happen because it's been planned. Second was, to begin with the end in mind, that the process of transition, like you said, is going to be hard, Dr. Diane. There is a grief process. There is a natural loss of something that was a certain way. And just beginning with the end in mind, because that process will end. They will settle into this new role. You will settle into this new role, and that will be a time of growth eventually. But so beginning with that in mind, that the transition will be rough, but there is an end point. And so that helps. The third was to put first things first. And in that case, I said to put the first thing first, being the kid who's living the nest. It's hard to do that, but that's where you say, this is about them getting out of the house, starting their life, exploring, and learn to be independent. So if you put the first things first and say the first thing is not me, it's that kid, then it allows you to kind of, they worked hard to get to where they are. They put a lot of work to get to that part. And it allows you to be able to say, okay, you know what? Things will be okay. If I need to cry or if I'm a little upset, maybe I'll go into a private room and do it a little bit just so that I don't take away from the excitement of them kind of leaving the nest. I mean, thinking win-win. And that's the part where we think about, this is so positive. I'm going to miss them, but oh my gosh, they did this. And I have this free time and I can explore my interests and things I hadn't gotten to do in a long time. I have more time to journal, to write, to dance, to go to the gym, to travel and stay an extra day because I felt like, to stay out late with my friends and not have to rush home. So that's why I said think about the win-win, and that when they come back home, they do value coming back home. They experience, they share stuff with you now as adults. They learn other things from other people and learn that there were so many different parenting styles, and then they come home and maybe I appreciate you even more sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
And then seeking first to understand and then to be understood. That's that 5th one. And that's the one I work on the most in life. I figure in those 7 habits, that's the one. And so sometimes when you meet people when you start getting weepy or mopey, which I did about, oh, my daughter is living 3 months. My daughter is living 2. And some people are like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for my teenager to leave. Or I have 3 kids under 10 and I just can't even imagine how much free time. I don't know what you're complaining about. It's like, just seek first to understand where they're coming from, where they are now in the throes of, daycare and sick kids and having a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. In their mind, having an emptiness is that's like the best thing. So just that's where they're coming from, or that not everybody has a relationship with their kid where, they actually are looking forward to that separation. So when somebody reacts in a way and they don't seem supportive, when you're like, moping, to understand that, what, we're all at different places, different phases, different relationships. So understanding that and not expecting that everyone's going to feel the same way we feel. You and I felt the same way, so it's easy.
Yes.
And then the 6th habit is synergize, which is where you find other people like you going through the same process. And the more you talk about it, the more you find people in your community or network. So you take all the hugs and prayers you can get, find other empty nesters, develop interest with them, share tips on what helped them get through. For somebody who's just starting, or if you have somebody, if you're a successful empty nester and have kind of gotten to that new baseline, sharing advice with people if they ask you. And then renewal is the last one, which is where you just use that time to take care of yourself. You have the time and space, you're reflecting, you're renewing, you're refreshing, and you're getting ready to adjust to that new phase. And, just know that, hey, this is something we all worked for. We all worked hard. The kids worked hard to get to this phase, and that they will be back. And you renew yourself, you spend that time to invest in yourself and do things for yourself. And then, so that was how I broke it down, and it kind of helped.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to have a system down. So so in general, I'll just speak to what I did, which I think was a lot of what you were saying. The system is so clever. I love it. So yeah, basically what I did first was to realize that it is a grief process, and just speaking to that. Some people have grief, and then you can actually slip into depression sometimes. And so they tend to dovetail quite a bit, as you know, Dr. Toyin. And so, there's the grief and there's feeling sad, and there are things that look a lot like depression, like you might not feel like eating, or your sleeping might be off, or your energy is off, your brain might be kind of, short circuiting, where you feel like you can't pay attention to things. Anxiety can come up. And so a feeling of being ungrounded is, really common with losses. So I think it's important, as you were saying with the planning, is that if you are showing some signs of depression, it would be helpful to get in contact with someone that can, like a professional that can help you go through that process. You may or may not need medication, but even speaking to, if you're in a religious community, someone at your religious community, or a therapist or a physician, just to make sure that you're going through the grieving process and not depression, because they do kind of dovetail. And there isn't necessarily, for those of you who have partners that you live with, they might notice it. But for those of us who don't, people may not notice the signs as readily because you're on your own. And like Dr. Toyin was saying, if you go to bed early, who's going to notice? If you don't eat, who's going to notice? So, you might have friends around you, but I don't know. I find that when I'm going through some tough stuff, sometimes I reach out and sometimes I draw in, right? Dr. Toyin's like saying, yeah, sometimes you draw in. So just be aware of that. Some other things that came up for me, or that I think of coming up when we were talking, is that change in roles that you have with your parenting style with your kids. And you have to do what's comfortable for you, but keep in mind that your kids change more, where they need you to be a stable home base for them. So in some ways, I feel like my kids benefited, and you can speak to this too, Dr. Toyin, but I found that my kids benefited more from knowing that, of course, that I miss them. I didn't hide that from them, but that I was okay. What do you think, Dr. Toyin?
I was doing the thumbs up when you were speaking, because that is so true. You have some kids that are naturally emotive and expressive, and they will tell you in real time. And even the ones who don't seem to show emotion that much, they care and worry about us too. Mm-hmm. And when they're leaving and they know you're alone in the house, they worry about you. My kids get excited when you say, They're like, hey, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm going to meet up with friends. Oh, I'm going to this show with this person, or I'm going to a play. They get really excited because for them, once in a while, they're out with their friends, they're partying, and they just kind of think about, oh, Saturday would have been maybe watching some dumb reality show with mom. Oh, she's there by herself. I wonder what she's up to. If they know that you're doing stuff, you're working out, you're at the gym, you're meeting up with your friends, you're writing, you're doing something silly, you tried improv class, it gets them so excited. They need to know. You're so right. Knowing that mom is okay makes them feel so much better. It's like a burden that you didn't put on them and you haven't said anything, but they know you. When they talk to you on the phone, they see you on FaceTime and they see that you're not where they think you should be. It bothers them. Some will tell you right up front, some may not. But when you said that, that is so true. More than ever, they need to know that you're okay and that you're doing well. And when that happens, it makes them thrive. Yes,
Yeah,
I totally agree with you.
I agree. And you can't hide stuff from kids. So, you think when you talk to them as you get older, and I remember talking to my parents as I got older, and there were things that they thought that they kept under wraps, but somehow like as kids know. So don't be that concerned about, you don't have to like paint on a happy face when you're really feeling sad, but they need to know at least fundamentally that you are still whole, at least, even though you're going through something, related to them. And then I found that you need the room, like emotional room, to just be able to let it go. Like if you feel like crying, fine. If you feel like dancing, good. If you feel like binging on Netflix and eating popcorn and drinking Coca-Cola for dinner, like I do sometimes, go ahead and do that. Because if you give yourself the time and don't diminish what you're feeling and don't downplay what you're feeling, then, and knowing that it will subside. If you give it attention, it will get better. It might feel like you are under the waves and you are just looking for a life preserver, but it does get better. Now, speaking of life preservers, what did you find has worked for you in terms of studying yourself, coming into your own?
Yes.
That kind of thing.
A couple of things, but just before I get into that, there was something you said just in the last part that I thought, like acknowledging and owning that everything you're feeling is fine. No guilt about feeling a certain way. And not comparing, your timeline is your timeline. So you can't, someone says, oh, I was fine in a month. Well, good for you. Just like,
good for you.
Like, it's good.
Yes, it's all good.
On ourselves, like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't feel this way. A certain, like there is no guilt. That change is hard. Even planned good change, there's anxiety that comes with that, even when it's a change that we want. And so that knowing that change is always hard, no matter when it's planned or not, and that, the anxiety that comes with that is real. There shouldn't be any guilt about feeling, if you feel good, if you feel bad, it's okay. And that the timeline is yours. That when you own that and you're not feeling like, oh my gosh, then that helps too. So that was part of that. Like my timeline is my timeline. And when I feel good and when I am able to not go, sit in their rooms and just look up all the stuff, that's okay. And then you did bring up a very important point, as physicians and Dr. Diane, kind of recognizing how much of it is a normal grief reaction and how much of it is depression, and really working with the therapist or trained professional. Because sometimes I've talked to a couple of friends during that emptiness part, and when they now start to see that this is maybe a little bit more than the normal grief reaction, is a time to actually why this child leaving the house is uncovering all of this emotion. And sometimes having the children in the house has allowed you not to have to deal with a lot of things. They're full-time jobs.
Yes.
Physically, emotionally, just doing that. And it's sometimes we get distracted by good things. Sometimes we think about things that distract us from working through our issues as bad distractions, too much work or too much time on the internet or social media. Sometimes our distractions are the people we love, our spouses, our kids. And sometimes when that person doesn't need you, 24 hours of the day, it brings up certain things that we hadn't even ever processed. We've just kind of put them down there, stuffed them away. And so it's always a good time to, if this is now seeming like way more than the normal grief reaction, to talk to a trained professional and walk through some of those issues, which maybe for the first time in a long time, you actually have time to process.
Yes. Oh, that is so on point. Because, when you go through losses, a lot of times it brings up, it's not just that loss that comes to that one is the most noticeable, but man, it can bring up all kinds of losses that you've had before. And so it is good to work, I think, with the professional. Personally, I would recommend it going in. If you have a few sessions and you're all good, then fine. But in my cadre of support, I have found that my psychiatrist has been so awesome, especially because we're roughly around the same age. So she has that life experience too, and she's talked to so many people that have gone through life changes. So it's nice for me to say, like, is this normal? Like, is this okay?
Yeah.
And, of course, she says it is okay. But, we've kept an eye on, so I think I might have mentioned this in previous podcasts, but I have had depression off and on over the years. So, I was concerned about that. And so it was really good for me to reach out to a professional that could help me with this process. Not everybody does that, but I did. Dr. Toyin, what else did you do? You mentioned journaling and being social. I think that's so important because, and even if you don't want to, like there's some times where you might feel just, you'd have to know, like, I'm just tired. I don't want to go out. But sometimes it actually is helpful to at least try it, go out with a friend, it doesn't have to be anything loud or noisy, or, go out to a movie. I remember once I was going to go out to dinner by myself, and I had just texted Dr. Toyin and I said, you know what, I'm about to go out to dinner. Do you want to join me? And she had time and we got together for a nice dinner, just right on the spur of the moment. So, so accept invitations. Even if you don't feel like it, you might find that it just helps to get you out of the house and get going, aside from work, because we work, but we're in a certain role at work. And, I've come to think of it as, I think of it almost like being a kid again. You can almost like being your kid's age again, where they've started new, they're exploring, they're meeting friends, they're learning new things, they're going new places, they're finding out who they are. And I see a lot of parallels between where they are in life and where I found myself to be in life. And they are homesick. We miss them,
It is. And you find out that those interests, those things that always brought you joy, the things that brought you joy at like 12 and 13, you kind of find yourself going back to that. Was it dance? Was it music? Was it art? Whatever, those things that you enjoyed, was it being physically active? Those things that you enjoyed, you find yourself going back. And it's like, again, you talked about having popcorn and Coca-Cola for dinner. That's what they're doing without mom saying,
That's what they're
you need to have like a vegetable and a protein, So it's like all of a sudden you're like a freshman in college, except you live in your own house and you make all your rules. You don't have a curfew. You can do anything. And so I made this list of, things that I was going to do. And I said, I can finally cut cable. And I did. I mean, that was like, ooh, so that saved me money. That was a win-win, cutting cable, volunteering and just being around other people. So I've done a lot more because I've had more time to not feel bad on a weekend where I wanted to spend time with the girls to say, yeah, I can do stuff on a Saturday. So I can do more mentoring and volunteering. I enjoy that. I spend more time at the gym. I do a lot of decluttering. That's been really therapeutic, taking a portion of the house and just saying, okay, for this 2 weeks, every couple of days, I'll spend an hour or two putting things away, giving things out, putting stuff for recycling or donating things or trashing a lot of things. And I had 2 things on my list that I still haven't done 2 years in now. I wanted to take guitar lessons and finally master my Spanish. And those 2 things, I haven't started guitar lessons, and my Spanish is still elementary Spanish. But there were things I put on my list as like I would work on during this empty nesting phase. But I think, just allowing yourself, thinking of finding the positives about that, and just then really planning, because it really does make, when they do come back home, really just a lot of excitement. Or when we plan trips to go visit them. I mean, that's always very exciting too, when you plan a weekend to meet up with them somewhere or go to wherever they are, or you're meeting up as adults in a third neutral place, and it's great. It's excitement, it's all that. So yeah.
It ends up being a place that you can really grow. And I think Dr. Toyin's has a lot of experience with this, and I have too. I'm a little, time-wise a little bit further behind. But what I have found is it's just a whole new way of being, where you still hold on to your kids. And I tell you what, if they needed something and they needed me to be there, I would drop everything. Dr. Toyin saying yes, she would do. I would drop everything and be there for them. So that doesn't go away. That caring doesn't go away, and their caring for you doesn't go away, but it does change. And so what I've found, and like I was saying, it's been hard to embrace, but the more I embrace it, the better it is. And that is taking on things where you think, you know what, I just might enjoy this. I might enjoy it. And so if you're, it can be simple things like you're at the store and you think, I usually don't buy flowers for myself, but I want to buy flowers for myself, or I want to go on the walk, or like you said, learning something new, going on a trip. You have time to read, learn something new. I think I'd already mentioned.
Date if you want to.
Date, yes. Date. You can.
Want to. Yeah.
Yep. You can stare out the window. You can go to bed early. You can take a long bath. Like, you can do things to take care of yourself. And it can be a challenge to put yourself first. But really, given that there isn't anyone around for you to really take care of, why don't you consider taking care of yourself? Some people get pets to, to have as companions. You could take a roommate, whatever you want to do. I am adding more to my whirlwind of change, and I'm actually moving cross country in a few months, so that we could do a whole nother podcast on that. But you can take on these major changes if you want to, and you feel that you're up to it. So I think that's all I have to add. Like, I feel like it's been kind of a challenging road. I don't feel like it's completely over yet, especially with moving to a new place. And that brings up the whole question of what is home? for me, what is home for my kids. But they've reassured me, even though I know that they're a little bit shaken up by it, that wherever I am is home for them. And so that does give me some comfort, even though that is a little, well, no, it's a lot uncomfortable. So, Dr. Toyin, any last thoughts? We should probably wrap it up. She and I could talk all afternoon. We've become great friends over the years. Oh, I wanted to mention one more thing, though. Sorry, I did have one more thing, and that is, as you were saying, you can look more into your avocation, so like your volunteering and that kind of thing. And what I've done too is I've leaned more into my avocations too. So I'm doing more coaching. I'm teaching physicians how to coach through the Physicians Coaching Academy. If you want to find out more about either of those, you can go to www.drdiane.com. That's www.drdianne.com. So I've leaned more into that, and that has been really satisfying to be able to help our physician community. I can do speaking engagements without really, taking into my account my kids' schedule. As you guys might have noticed who follow the podcast regularly, I had taken a hiatus from doing new episodes of the podcast, and so I've taken that up again. So look forward to new episodes coming up. So there's a lot of room for growth.
Yes.
So with that, Dr. Toyin, let's wrap up and get to, if there's last comments that you want to make or things that you want to share.
I think we covered a lot of ground, and from our personal experiences, and just that makes it so powerful, and just being able to share those experiences with other people. But bottom line is to say, well, you know what, we have become empty nesters, a lot of it because of planning and our kids get into something that they worked hard to get to. And when we frame it that way, it allows us to know that just as they're starting to explore the excitement, this is a natural part of life. Doesn't mean that change is not difficult, but that if we approach it that way, that this is an exciting time for them, and that they will be back. They will be back in short bursts and longer bursts. Sometimes after college, they're right back for 2 or 3 years trying to save money on that couch. So if you think about it, that they will be back, that we are still their parents, even though we're not preparing every meal or making sure they ate, then we can be positive about it and use that time to grow and to renew ourselves and to explore interests or re-explore old things. And that to know that our timeline is our timeline. Our feelings are valid, and not everyone's going to feel the same way, and that's okay. And that they will be back. And so I in a better place than I thought I would be. I mean, when I projected this emptiness, I didn't know that I would ever be. I feel like I'm in a good place. I have a great relationship with the girls. When they come home or when I visit, it's awesome. We talk as often as they're willing to talk. And,
yeah, it is based on them, isn't it?
And there are times when, you're traveling, because of work, and then you decide, I have friends in this town, so I'll stay an extra 2 days. And the girls I've had, especially my younger one, she's like, do you even miss me, Mom? You're having too much fun. I'm like, no, it's just this week I happen to have some vacation time. But I think that just like anything else, it's an adjustment, and being able to synergize with other empty nesters and sharing when we've gone through that transition with other people, telling that, your feelings are legit, it's okay. And just knowing that, it's not going to be perfect, but it is change. So, yeah.
Well, I appreciate everything that you've said. And I definitely feel like as we're talking, you should see all the head nodding and yes, ma'am, yes, doctor, that's going on.
Yes, Dr.
'Cause,
Diane.
yeah,
Yeah.
we've been through a lot. We're coming out on the other side, and just know that you will too.
Yes.
We should have another chat. I would love to have another chat about just changes in life. Like you talked about menopause, but I would love to let's do another one about like going into your 50s and life changes that occur there. Because we didn't get a chance to talk about, sorry you guys, but we didn't get a chance to talk about partners going into that second phase of life. Life changes. You know, some people are taking on new work experiences.
Correct.
You know, I talked to a lot of doctors who are looking at non-clinical work or changing their work.
Careers.
So we are
aging
definitely
parents.
Oh yes,
aging parents. There's just so much that's going on, and trying to obviously see that, okay, I am solidly midlife. I mean, when you're in your 50s, no matter how you put it, except you live to be 120, you're solidly on that other half, and coping with that and figuring that out, especially because many of us, you know, don't really start being adults until our 30s. When all our colleagues from college already have 5 jobs, you know, we're still like an intern, feeling all like a student. You know, we're always like a little delayed, and they're like, oh, what happened?
Yeah.
So yes.
So look forward to that, you guys. We're definitely going to do a podcast about that. So look forward to that coming up. And with that, we're going to really wrap up. We're kind of like the hand on the doorknob, like we just keep talking.
That's how we are.
But you know, and I appreciate you all who listened to the whole episode. Maybe you listened to it in 2 parts, but I really felt like it was something that I really wanted to discuss, especially with Dr. Toyin. She's just amazing. So thank you again, Dr. Toyin.
Thank you, Dr. Diane. As always, a pleasure.
And to you guys, thank you so much for listening, and we'll look forward to another episode of the Doctor's Life podcast. Until then, I hope you all stay happy and healthy, and I'll look forward to sharing with you guys another episode soon. Take care. Thanks for listening today. If you like what you've heard, be sure to hit subscribe in your podcast app so that you won't miss an episode. You can also read show notes, get links, and contact me by going to drdiane.com. That's www.drdianne.com. And docs, while you're there, take the Physician Vitality Assessment, which will help you more clearly see if you are at risk for burnout.